Hello there. Good afternoon. We're going to talk about Peter Masters, Chapter 5 within Systems in English Grammar. That's going to be Chapter 5, the negation system. The negation system. You will find that in 109 in your textbook. That is page 109. Oh my goodness. Okay, so I have a lot to cover, so we're going to get started here. The negation system. In chapter 5, it is comprised of 6 parts. Number 1, auxiliary negation. Number 2, adverbial negation. 3, negation with no. 4, morphological negation. 5, multiple negators. 6, addressing student errors. So we'll go through each of these. Some will be quicker than others. This first one's going to be long, then they get pretty short. All right. First up, auxiliary negation. Number 1, auxiliary negation. According to Masters, auxiliary negation is the most frequently occurring type of negation in English. It is dependent on the auxiliary verb form, and the auxiliary verb is either overt or not overt. In the example, John is singing, is the auxiliary verb overt or not overt? That is the question. Is it overt or not overt? In the example, John is singing, the answer is that the auxiliary verb is overt, as in you can see it, and the overt auxiliary verb in the sentence is. John is singing. Auxiliary negation places not directly after the auxiliary verb. That is how it works. In this example, it would be John is, which is the auxiliary, followed immediately by not singing. So we will say John is not singing is the negative version of the sentence. That is with overt. Something that Masters is going to stress throughout this chapter that you will see once you read it is the importance of contractions within the negation system. Contractions to auxiliary negation are achieved by placing the word not adjacent to the auxiliary verb and replacing the O in not with an apostrophe. Right here we have John is not singing. We squish the is and the not together, and then we remove the O and replace it with an apostrophe. John isn't singing from John is not singing. So according to Masters, there are 3 steps in negating a statement with an auxiliary verb. The first step is to identify the auxiliary verb. We're going to call auxiliary verb, we're going to call it aux. For non-overt auxiliary verbs, this is going to be a problem though. Here is an example of a sentence with a non-overt auxiliary verb. The boy lives in Santiago. The boy lives in Santiago. Is there any auxiliary verb there? There is not. We have the boy and then lives as the main verb, no auxiliary. There's no is, there's nothing. According to Masters, when you can't see an auxiliary verb, then you assume that it is buried, like this dog is burying something or digging up. To negate the auxiliary, you have to first dig it up. According to Masters, the dug up aux is always a form of do, as in only the aux do can be buried. So the boy lives in Santiago. For the example, the boy lives in Santiago, we dig up the aux do before the simple present verb lives. Do we have that here? Oh yes. English requires us to transfer the S from lives to do, forming does. This is really useful when working with our students because it's kind of very simple. We have, this is probably not the way it actually is within the linguistics, but as far as telling a student in the moment, you have an S in lives and suddenly bring in do. We bring in do. So before this would say the boy do lives in Santiago. We take the S from lives and put it to the do, it becomes does, magically. It adds an E as well, but we can just pretend it's like do with an S from the lives. And so you might use this as a teacher. I think I will. The boy does live in Santiago. And then we, as part of auxiliary negation, we put a not right after the auxiliary verb, which we have dug up. The auxiliary verb does. So it becomes, the boy does not live in Santiago. Lastly, we contract does not to doesn't. So there are only three kinds of non-overt auxiliary verbs, and they occur in the following verb tenses. This is very important. The last one we just looked at, the boy lives in Santiago, that is singular subject, just the boy, with the main verb lives in simple present tense. The two other verb tenses include plural subject with the main verb in the simple present tense. So similar to number one, where the boy lives in Santiago, would be the girls, plural, like punk hairstyles. And then the third option for non-overt auxiliary verb occurs in any subject, so it could be plural, singular, with the main verb in the simple past tense. The children wanted a dog. So for 1 and 2, the girls like punk hairstyles. Yes, check it out. Like, we see here that there's no S. So once we dig up do, the girls do like punk hairstyles. You're working with your student, you can remind them there's no S to transfer to the do. It stays what it is. It's the girls do like punk hairstyles. Or to make it auxiliary, you'd say the girls do not. Of course, the girls do not like punk hairstyles. And then you'd contract it. There you go. Very simple compared to the wanted of the simple past tense. The children wanted a dog. You dig up the do, the do in there. The children do wanted a dog. You bring the D from wanted to the do. This is some crazy stuff, but I think you'll get used to it. Or if you've heard this already, I shouldn't be explaining it. The children did want a dog. Magically, the ed from wanted transfers to do and turns into did. This is the magic that I think is very useful when teaching this. The children did want a dog. The auxiliary negation following did would be did not. The contraction of that would be the children didn't want a dog. Cool. This is the answer as it would be. The girls don't like punk hairstyles. The children didn't want a dog. Masters has 3 steps for negating a statement with auxiliary negation. Step 1, identify the aux or dig it up if it is buried. Step 2, place the word not directly after the aux. Step 3, contract aux plus not when appropriate. So aux plus not is that contraction. When appropriate, he really stresses that you should let students know they shouldn't be using this in academic papers. This is something that they should not be used maybe in written things. Maybe that could be a rule for them. The idea is it's a little too informal for certain settings. So the appropriateness is something you'd also want to teach when you're teaching this. But yeah, I didn't, that's a very common thing to say. I wouldn't, I suppose wouldn't breaks this rule. Or no, it doesn't. But anyway, we'll keep going. Great. Next up, adverbial negation. Adverbial negation negates a sentence by inserting a negative adverb of frequency. Adverbs of frequency occur in the verb slot, directly before the verb. The absolute negative adverb of frequency is never, while the adverbs seldom, rarely, and hardly ever indicate a negative tendency. 2 examples Masters gives include A, Tom sleeps with the window open, and B, Joanne never sleeps with the window open. We notice the word never before sleeps. We wouldn't have Joanne sleeps never with the window open. That might be a mistake students make. We would have it directly before the verb sleeps. We put it before the first auxiliary verb. Here's two more examples. A child will seldom cry without a reason. Underlined words are the auxiliary verbs. The second example, the lowland gorilla had rarely been seen in the wild. Now, without the rarely, without the adverbial negation, it would be the lowland gorilla had been seen in the wild. Two auxiliaries next to each other before the main verb. That is not uncommon. When plugging in rarely, you want to put it after the first auxiliary. Just going back, this is a really good phrase right here, negative adverb of frequency. So rarely is a negative adverb of frequency. Cool. If the adverb of frequency always occurs after the first auxiliary, where should the negative adverb of frequency go in the following sentence? This might be so easy, but maybe this is something that I wasn't explaining for you in a way that works. So just let's verify here that we understand. A dog has been found on the island. The underlined words are the auxiliary verbs. Practice using the negative adverb of frequency never. Where would you put it? If you guessed, more than guess, but if you knew the answer was a dog has never been found on the island, then you are correct. It goes after the first auxiliary verb. Next up, negation with no. The two aforementioned sentence negations work within the verb slot. Yeah, okay. Negation with no can negate instead with the noun, as well as two other things I will share in a little bit. But we'll start with noun. This can only be done with the determiner no. Here is an example. Here's the example of the positive sentence. The money was found, and here is now the negative sentence. No money was found. No has replaced the determiner the. We can negate sentence A by the use of a negative noun phrase in the subject slot of the sentence. Yes, okay. Here's a dense sentence from Masters. I'm still chewing on this, so I think we will all be chewing on this, and maybe this will make more be clear to you, but I've been chewing on it. Ready? Negative noun phrases can occur in any sentence slot that allows for an NP. This is a pretty sweeping statement that Masters makes. Negative noun phrases can occur in any sentence slot that allows an NP. Here's the following examples. A, he will drink no wine before it's time. B, you are no Jack Kennedy. Notice the placement of no and what it does to the sentence. In the same way we can negate a noun, we can also negate adjectives and adverbs of comparison. This was the second part. We were saying that is not just nouns we can negate in this way. We can also negate adjectives and adverbs of comparison, which is a unique type of adjective and adverb. Adjectives and adverbs of comparison. Note the following examples provided by Masters. A, the central processor is no bigger than a postage stamp. B, Mr. Wartelberg can no longer teach in this district. As Masters notes, there is seldom a simple relationship between the positive and negative forms of a comparative adjective or adverb. If we were to try to flip these sentences, it would be something like the central processor is no bigger than a postage stamp. It would be like the central processor is bigger than the postage stamp. Masters argues that this phrase means that it's the same size, so the opposite could be also the central processor is no smaller, is literally smaller than a postage stamp. For B, it says Mr. Wartelberg can no longer teach in this district. The opposite would be Mr. Wartelberg can still teach in this district, since we're making it comparative. If it was simply Mr. Wartelberg can teach in this district, what's it comparing to? Nothing. Since there is seldom a simple relationship between positive and negative forms of a comparative adjective or adverb, let's try and find the negative form of this comparative adverb. Adverb. The old man knew he would see his daughter no more. What would be the positive, I should say? The old man knew that he would see his daughter no more. The old man knew that he would still see his daughter. Similar to the example we had on the previous slide. The word still becomes a comparison. If it was simply the old man knew he would see his daughter, it's not really the positive of this negative statement that we've just seen on this page. That's a dense one. If it is, I would going back to it. The chapter in it is also really helpful, chapter 5. But let's go next up, morphological negation. This one's pretty straightforward. A morphological negation is done by attaching a negative prefix to an adjective or adverb. So we're still in this territory of adjectives and adverbs. The most common negative prefixes are il, im, ear, non, and un. Masters provides us with the following examples. This is something that I think in most part the students will have to memorize. Improper versus ill proper. Why is it improper? Yeah, this is something you will work with your students. Next up, multiple negators. Masters talks how English is a very mathematical language. 2 negatives make a positive, 3 negatives make a negative, and so on. Masters provides the following examples. John is not unhappy with his work. B, nobody is incapable of irrationality. So let's look at that first one. Masters is pointing out the difference between being happy and not being unhappy. He points it out as a difference of degrees. We can often assume that not being unhappy is more similar to feeling indifferent. So yeah, John is not unhappy with his work. And then we have another statement like, nobody is incapable of irrationality. Nobody is incapable. All right, I have to actually wrap my head around it. Masters talks about once we go past 3 negatives, we start taxing comprehensions. Nobody is above being irrational is basically what it's saying. Nobody is incapable of irrationality. It is kind of confusing. Lastly, for addressing student errors, Peter Masters, Systems in English Grammar, Chapter 5 addresses a way we can shift our perspective and look at how we can best support our students when we are correcting or working with them in their negation errors. Masters stresses these 4 features to praise when looking at students' attempts at negating. A, they're using the correct negation type, either auxiliary, adverbial, noun phrase, or morphological. Be like, oh, good job, you're using the auxiliary negation. That's great, you did great, you followed, that's good, you knew to do that. B, they're using the correct form of negator. The choice for spelling of the negator or the negative prefix. C, the correct position of negator. And then the last one he mentions is the correct contraction. So maybe the apostrophe is in the right spot. If it's in the right spot, you can say good job to see the glass as half full versus half empty. So I'm going to post these as our discussion questions. Thanks for being here throughout this. Number 1, why might Masters stress the importance of contractions in this chapter that is so focused on negations? For students, obviously. Question 2 is a doozy. I apologize, but I like it. Masters states the only way to negate a sentence is with the determiner no. This is for negating with no. If you remember, here's the example. The money was found. B, no money was found. You have this precocious student in your class, and they give this creative response to learning about this. They say, can you replace the word no with anything else? They quickly list these words. For example, zero, or zilch, or zip, or blank, or diddly squat. For example, zero money was found, or blank money was found. How would you respond to this student? All right, thank you guys for listening. I look forward to reading your discussion responses.